Hello and welcome back to Lady Lovestead Reads. This is Friday Reads. Hoping that my camera does not fall over. If you are new here, welcome. My name is Jessica. I'm your host here at Castle Lovestead, which is my home nestled in the prairie realm of Booklandia. Today I want to share with you what I have read over the past week. Ring Shout by P. DeJelly Clark. This was a book that I was finishing from last week, so if you watched last week's Friday Reads, I talked about it there. And this is a work of speculative fantasy horror. It's a novella. The premise of this book is that the Ku Klux Klan is made up of demons, and there's a group of women who are demon hunters. These demons are utilizing the Birth of the Nation film to stir up hate in Americans. All the demons need to inhabit a person's body is for that body to be so filled with hate they can sneak right on in. So they're utilizing the film Birth of a Nation, again, to stir up that hate in people so that they can inhabit more human bodies. So the main characters are fighting these demons who are now taking orders from a larger demon, a big bad, that the main characters don't really know who this big bad is, where it is, or what its plan is. So that is the premise of this story. It is a very well done speculative piece. There's so much good symbolism, so many good analogies, so many good historical references. I did a lot of work while I was reading this book, looking up the historical references, really thinking about the symbolism, what it means, what P. DeJelly Clark is saying about society with this story. So it's a really well done piece of speculative fiction. I did have a bit of trouble connecting with the story at an emotional level. I did have trouble being just absorbed in the story. And I think it is in part because of how speculative it is. I tend to be a very intellectual reader sometimes, especially with something like this where there's just so much to unpack. And the problem with that is it just takes me out of the story. It keeps me from being absorbed in the story, and I end up not really having that emotional connection to characters or to plots or anything like that. So, I can't say that I enjoyed this book because I was so caught up in intellectualizing it that I didn't have a chance to just be absorbed by the story. And I think that's probably more of a me issue than it is a P. DeJelly Clark issue. Probably if I reread it, and that's definitely a possibility since the book is so short. If I reread it, I could maybe suspend all that intellectualizing and just try to be involved in the story and with the characters. And maybe it would be a different reading experience then. So I did end up giving this book 4 stars out of 5 for my overall book rating. And in terms of the actual horror genre, because I like to rate books according to genre and the conventions of the genre as well, that generally is a slightly different rating than my overall rating. So my overall rating really judges quality of the book. And then the more genre-based ratings tend to focus on enjoyment level and how well these books meet the conventions of that particular genre. In terms of the genre of being speculative horror, I would probably give this 3 chainsaws out of 5. Again, just because I was having a hard time feeling really absorbed in the actual story because the speculative part was so heavy for me. I don't know that it was heavy-handed by the writer, but it was heavy-handed for me in my reading strategies and in the way that I read the book. So 4 stars out of 5 overall and 3 chainsaws out of 5 for horror conventions. Men Explain Things to Me by Rebecca Solnit. This is a collection of essays, feminist essays primarily, and it was okay. So I do have a background in women's and gender studies. I have a graduate certificate in women's and gender studies, and I'm not saying that to be oh, I am so brilliant. I know all the things of all the gender studies. That's not the case. The reason I bring that up is because I am very well versed in feminist literature, especially second wave feminist literature and theorists like Betty Friedan and Judith Butler. And Judith Butler's not quite second wave, she's more pushing that intersectional stuff. But so Betty Friedan, Simone de Beauvoir, so those second wave feminist writers. I've read pretty much all of the standard classic feminist lit in terms of nonfiction essays and so forth. And this read very much like second wave feminism. It was published in 2014, so it was published right in the middle of intersectional femininity and intersectional feminism, but it read very much like second wave. Second wave feminism is criticized for being whitewashed and for being very much just focused on the white woman's perspective and the white woman's pursuit of justice, gender justice, and this did that. I mean, it was a lot very much focused from the perspective of the white woman's pursuit of justice. And I mean, there's a little bit of intersectionality in there. She does talk about a few women of color, but it really is still centering white womanhood. Like, and I didn't love it. I thought that the essays didn't really tell us anything new. I mean, they told us there's violence against women. Women are sexually assaulted. Women are silenced. Like, we know this. We know this already. This is well established. And I didn't think that she really added anything new or interesting to the feminist conversation, to feminist literature. I did think it was very second wave, very centered on white womanhood. And yeah, I gave it 2 stars out of 5. And this is actually a book that I own, so I will be unhauling it as well. One essay that I did actually like in here was an essay she wrote about Virginia Woolf, but again, like, white woman. But she does understand Virginia Woolf really well, and she has a quote about Virginia Woolf that I thought does a nice job of summing up, you know, exactly what Woolf is about. So she says, Woolf gave us limitlessness, impossible to grasp, urgent to embrace, as fluid as water, as endless as desire, a compass by which to get lost. That's on page 99. So I did like her essay on Virginia Woolf. That was about it, though. Like, Rebecca Solnit is the person who gets credit for the term mansplaining, and she didn't even develop that term. I have not looked up who did yet. Funny thing is, she mentions in here that she's not the person who came up with that term, but she doesn't tell us who came up with it either, which is really ironic since so much of her work is about silencing women and erasure of women's voices, and here she is participating in that by not telling us who it was who developed the term mansplaining. If it wasn't you, Becca, who was it? So, not a big fan, 2 stars out of 5, and I will be unhauling this off of my bookshelf. Next, I continued on with this series, The Promised Neverland by Caillou Shirai, with art by Posuka Demisu. It is hard for me to talk much about what's happening in this without spoiling the first book, which sets up the premise. So if you're okay with the first manga in the series being spoiled, I will share a little spoiler here. I'll put spoilers on the image so that you know when the spoilers are over. In the first book, we learn that this orphanage where all of these kids live is not a good place. What the people running the orphanage are doing is they are farming children to be fed to demons as lunch, basically. So all of these children are harvested around the age of 12 if they're scoring really good on these tests that they're taking. If they stop scoring good on the tests, they're harvested earlier in their life. And so 3 of the kids figure out that that is what's happening at the orphanage, and they are now trying to find a way to escape and to bring all of the other children with them on the escape. These are 3 of the oldest kids that are now developing this escape plan. So spoilers over. Basically, this is like watching these kids play a game of chess with the bad guy. And I think I mentioned this in the last video where I talked about this series, but it reminds me a lot of Death Note, in that there's all of this plotting and one side trying to figure out the motives of the other side, and each side trying to figure out the next move that the other person is going to make. So yes, very much like a game of chess, and I am enjoying it. I forgot to mention, so I did give this book 3 stars out of 5. And then I also read, I don't currently have it because I read it on my Kindle and immediately just returned it and checked out something else through Kindle Unlimited. But I did try to read the first book in the Hannah Swenson Cozy Mystery series, The Chocolate Chip Cookie Murder by Joanne Fluke, and I DNF'd it at page 50. It just was not for me. The writing fell short for me. There was a lot of telling rather than showing. The characters weren't very believable, and it just wasn't my jam. So I DNF'd it at page 50. Lastly, I have read On What Grounds by Cleo Coyle. This is a cozy mystery, and I enjoyed this. So this is a cozy mystery set at a coffee shop called The Blend in the West Village of New York City, which is amazing. I love New York City. I am obsessed with coffee. It's kind of a dream of mine to have my own coffee shop and bookstore. And this coffee shop owner has hired someone to take over the coffee shop. She's the main character, Claire, and Claire moves into the apartment above the shop, and it is like super cozy. And then one of the employees is pushed down a flight of stairs and unconscious, and the police cannot prove that it was foul play, so Claire has taken it upon herself to figure out who pushed this girl down the stairs, because insurance reasons, the girl's mom is threatening to sue the coffee shop, so on and so forth. And it's good. I mean, okay, honestly, I figured out the murderer. By page like 200 or so, and there are almost 300 pages in the book, and I got it right. Sleuth points to me. But what I liked about this too is the coffee knowledge. She talks so much about coffee, like where coffee comes from, how it's roasted, how it's harvested, what makes a good cup of coffee. And the book also does give you some coffee recipes in the back, which is really fun. And I thought the writing was also pretty solid with this book. So I liked the way she describes the characters, because the character descriptions are very consistent throughout the book. There's good continuity there. For example, she describes the main character's husband as being like a globetrotter and this free spirit and all of that. And it's really neat the way that she writes scenes with these characters in it, because it stays so true to the characters. So for example, when she's describing that ex-husband who's like the globetrotter, there's a scene, page 80, his daughter is visiting him. "Hi, Muffin," said Matt. "Hi, Daddy." Dawn broke in Matt's face, a grin from coast to coast. And I thought that was so good. Like, that is really good writing, because Matt is the one who's the globe traveler, travels the world, very free-spirited. And so that line, "a grin from coast to coast," is so consistent with his character. So I thought that was really good. There were some other descriptions of coffee and like the importance of coffee and what coffee means. So on page 31, She says, if we are a civilization of coffee drinkers, then the coffee we buy, brew, and drink should be as great as our civilized heritage. For though coffee may seem a small thing, it is a ritual that reflects the daily standards we set for ourselves throughout our lives. Whether the highest or lowest, it is the standard we pass on to our children. And if we fail to pass on the highest standards, even in the smallest things, then how can we as a civilization hope to progress? Perhaps T.S. Eliot was right. Some of us do measure out our lives with coffee spoons. All the more reason to pay attention to the quality of the bean. So good. I love it. So that's the kind of coffee writing in this book. There was another section that I really liked, a quotable section on page 91. She was talking about 9/11, and since this is set in New York, the coffee shop provided free coffee to all of the first responders that worked on that day. And so on 91, she says, what cheered and warmed these weary people for a few minutes wasn't the liquid extraction of a handful of beans, but the idea that someone had made it for them. Someone had cared, someone had loved, an essential reminder for anyone who must face the gray, twisted evidence of someone else's hate. It's so good. So very good writing in this, and although I figured out who done it, it was still a fun story. I loved the cozy vibe of the coffee shop in New York City and the apartment above, and just totally my cup of joe. So I gave this book 3 stars out of 5 for overall quality. For the genre conventions, I do give it 5 bottles of poison out of 5. That's what I've read this week. Tell me how you're doing down below. And until next time, make sure that you read good books, drink good coffee, take care of yourselves and each other. Bye!